Breaking news: major changes are coming to the way elderly drivers in the UK renew their driving licenses. Welcome to the UK Pension Hub, your trusted source for all updates that matter to pensioners across the country. Today's update is one that could dramatically impact the lives of millions of elderly drivers throughout the UK. Starting 5 September 2025, the rules for drivers aged 70 and above will change significantly, marking one of the most substantial updates to driver licensing laws in decades. These reforms could affect millions of older motorists across the country, many of whom rely heavily on their vehicles for everyday life. For years, the license renewal process for elderly drivers has been relatively straightforward. Simply complete a form, declare your medical fitness, and renew your license every 3 years. But all of that is about to change. Under the current system, once a driver turns 70, they must renew their license every 3 years by self-certifying that they are medically fit to drive. There is no mandatory medical examination or driving test, and the entire process largely depends on honesty and self-awareness. Many have praised this light-touch approach for its simplicity, especially given the importance of driving to older individuals. However, critics, particularly those from road safety groups, have long voiced concerns that the system lacks sufficient safeguards. They argue that leaving such decision solely to the individual, without any verification, puts other road users at risk. From 5 September 2025, the system will become far more rigorous. The DVLA, Driver and Vehicle Licensing Agency, in collaboration with the UK government, is introducing new mandatory requirements aimed at enhancing road safety. These include compulsory eyesight tests, GP-certified health declarations, and in some cases, practical driving assessments. The reforms represent a significant shift from a trust-based system to one that actively verifies a driver's fitness and ability. One of the most notable changes is the introduction of mandatory eyesight tests. All drivers aged 70 and over will be required to submit proof of having passed an eyesight exam within the previous 12 months at the time of license renewal. This includes the ability to read a number plate from 20 meters away, along with confirmation from a certified optician or optometrist. If a driver fails to provide this evidence, their license will not be renewed. Supporters of this change argue that it will ensure only those who are physically capable of driving safely remain on the road. Critics, however, suggest it introduces unnecessary costs and stress for pensioners, especially those living on limited incomes. The second major change relates to medical certifications. Previously, drivers were only required to declare any health conditions themselves. Under the new system, if a driver has any known medical condition such as diabetes, epilepsy, heart issues, or has suffered a stroke, they must now obtain a signed declaration from their GP confirming that they are fit to drive. This adds another layer of verification, but it also increases the burden on older drivers who may need to book GP appointments, provide supporting documentation, and manage additional costs. There's also concern that the DVLA will now have increased authority to request medical records and reject renewals based on perceived health risks, potentially leading to a rise in the number of elderly drivers being forced off the roads. Another significant change is the introduction of random spot checks for drivers over 75, and the possibility of on-road driving assessments for those whose medical conditions or driving abilities raise concerns. While not all older drivers will be required to retake a driving test, the DVLA now reserves the right to request a practical assessment of driving skills. These tests will focus on key factors such as reaction times, awareness of road hazards, and overall control of the vehicle. For some, this feels like a thinly veiled attempt to quietly remove elderly drivers from the road under the guise of safety checks. Supporters of the new regulations argue that these changes are not only sensible but necessary. Older drivers are statistically more likely to suffer serious injuries or fatalities in road accidents, even when they are not at fault. Medical conditions associated with aging, such as dementia, glaucoma, and slower reflexes, can reduce driving ability over time. Proponents of the changes believe the new rules will lead to earlier detection of such conditions, ultimately preventing accidents and saving lives. Road safety groups, some medical organizations, and families of crash victims have been advocating for such reforms for years. For them, the argument is simple: lives matter more than convenience. However, the backlash from elderly advocacy groups has been strong. Many believe that these reforms are discriminatory and unfairly target people based solely on age. There's a growing sentiment among pensioners and rights groups that the government is using safety as a cover for broader policy aims. Concerns include the additional costs of medical exams and eye tests, the stress of possibly being denied a license, and the loss of independence that comes with no longer being able to drive. For pensioners, especially those living in rural areas where public transport is sparse or unreliable, losing the right to drive could mean being cut off from essential services, social connections, and daily necessities like shopping or attending medical appointments. Even for those living in urban areas, the new system introduces stress and logistical challenges. Managing paperwork, securing appointments, and navigating an increasingly complex renewal process can be overwhelming. There's also concern that the government is pushing this agenda not just for safety reasons, but to promote broader goals such as reducing congestion, cutting vehicle emissions, and encouraging the use of public transport. Fewer elderly drivers on the road could translate into fewer cars overall, which aligns with the UK's long-term environmental goals and urban planning strategies. Some have even suggested that the reforms may indirectly reduce costs for public services such as the NHS by decreasing the number of elderly-related car accidents. So, what can older drivers do now to prepare? The most important step is to be proactive. Booking an eyesight test in advance, consulting with your GP about any existing medical conditions, and preparing the necessary paperwork for your renewal will help avoid delays or surprises. It's also a good idea to practice and assess your own driving habits to stay sharp and confident behind the wheel. Maintaining up-to-date medical records and being honest about any changes in health could make the renewal process smoother and help retain your license. Early preparation could mean the difference between continued freedom and sudden restrictions. Ultimately, these changes are more than just a policy update. They represent a profound shift in how society views aging and driving. For some, it's a welcome improvement in road safety. For others, it's an attack on personal freedom and dignity. The debate continues, but what's clear is that from 5 September 2025, every driver over the age of 70 in the UK will face a more demanding and closely monitored path to keeping their license. Whether you view these reforms as a necessary safety measure or as unfair bureaucracy, the reality is that they're happening, and preparation is key. Knowledge is power, and staying informed will help you or your loved ones make the best decisions in the coming months. If you found this breakdown helpful, consider subscribing to UK Pension Hub. We'll continue to cover important updates that affect pensioners, drivers, and anyone navigating the changes that come with aging in the UK. Turn on notifications so you don't miss our latest videos, and most importantly, share this with anyone you know who is approaching 70 or already over the threshold. These changes are just around the corner, and being prepared could make all the difference.